The governor of Edo State, Reuben Abati, has called on the national chairman of the All Progressives Congress, Oshiomole, not to interfere with the June 22nd governorship primary in the state. Governor Obaseki disclosed this on Wednesday when he submitted his expression of interest and nomination form at the party national secretariat in Abuja. He said, "I'm calling on Oshiomole to recuse himself from the Edo governorship process because he's an interesting party." The governor added that he was ready for any mode of primary, whether direct or indirect, but insisted the constitution of the party must be followed. In the meantime, he has vowed not to defect to another party, whatever happens within the APC. Well, it appears that that olive branch that we reported was extended yesterday, it looks like it's been withdrawn. Otherwise, how do you order somebody to recuse himself? Well, one would hope that the national chairman will do nothing to interfere in the democratic process, because INEC has said time and time again that a flawed primary is fatal. So I hope APC will learn from the harsh lessons that they've undergone. I hope everybody knows what they're doing at this point, but it doesn't seem like the row is over between the political godfather and his godson.
Yes, a flawed primary is fatal, as we saw, for example, in Zamfara State, and I guess also in Bauchi State, and to some extent also in Rivers State. And the expectation of the electoral body is that these political parties will have learned their lessons. But it looks like within the APC in Edo State, lessons have not been learned. And the June 22 primaries as scheduled is likely to be the equivalent of a warfare.
Yep.
Because at the moment, you have on one hand, Obaseki and Oshiomole, not being able to make peace at all. Governor Obaseki had also made the attempt to reach out to the presidency and also to Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu to see how they could intervene to make peace, to broker peace in Edo State APC. I don't think that has yielded any fruit. Governor Obaseki's main point is that Comrade Adams Oshiomole cannot be the judge, the jury, and the executioner in his own matter because of the crisis that they have had within the party in Edo State. But the truth of the matter is that Oshiomole is the chairman of the party, is the chairman of the National Working Committee, and the constitution of the party empowers the National Working Committee to decide on the mode of primary to be adopted. Now, obviously, Governor Obaseki is opposed to direct primary, which the National Working Committee has said that's what will be used. He would prefer the indirect primary, which will allow him to bring delegates. Now, the direct primary, that will be done, the choice will be made by party members. So there is disagreement in terms of what mode of primary should be adopted. But the Constitution empowers the NWC, which is led by Oshiomole, to take that decision. And it has taken that decision. And I think they've also communicated that decision appropriately to the INEC. Now, on the other hand, in Edo State, you have what is called the Oshiomole Group, or the Edo People's Movement within the APC. Now, if a week ago or so, we were told Ize Iyamu, or Sage Ize Iyamu, pastor, have been chosen as a consensus candidate. Now, that alliance has also broken down. The persons who purportedly formed the alliance with him, including Dr. Paul Sodubu, former deputy governor, including Dr. Ogienwonyi, they have also all picked up forms. So now, at the moment, you have 6 aspirants. So on June 2022, it remains to be seen what will happen in Edo State, APC. But whatever happens, there should be maturity. There should be no outbreak of violence. I mean, all the aspirants should realize that it's the peace and stability of Edo State and the interest of the people that is more important than their own individual ambitions.
Absolutely. Let's not forget it's about public service at the end of the day, yes.
You cannot be more correct.
Prof, I can tell you what. The federal government has lamented that COVID-19 has attacked all sources of Nigeria's revenues. Our sister outfit reports that the Minister of Information and Culture, Alhaji Lai Mohammed, said this at the end of the Federal Executive Council meeting in Abuja. According to the minister, the disease had adversely affected the global economy with $1 trillion lost in aviation industry alone. According to him, with the lockdown of Lagos, Ogun, and Abuja for several weeks and crude oil being sold at $18 per barrel, Nigeria's losses are monumental. Meanwhile, 384 new confirmed cases and 1 death were recorded in Nigeria yesterday, bringing the total of infections to 11,166, with 3,329 persons discharged and 315 deaths recorded in 35 states and the Federal Capital Territory. The 348 new cases announced last night by the Nigeria Center for Disease Control were from 19 states, including Lagos, 163, FCT, 76, Ebonyi, 23, Rivers, 21, and Delta, Nasarawa, and Niger have 8 each. Enugu has 6, Bauchi, Edo, Ekiti, Ondo, and Gombe, 5 each. Benue, 4, and Ogun, 2. Osun, Plateau, Kogi, and Anambra have 1 each. Now, Governor Aminu Masari of Katsina State says he will no longer negotiate peace with armed bandits who have been terrorizing the state and its immediate neighbors because of their failure to honor previous agreements he had with them. Masari, who is governor of President Muhammadu Buhari's home state, says the decision was based on the renewed attacks, kidnapping, and cattle rustling by the bandits in the state. Governor Aminu Masari has vowed that he would no longer negotiate with them following their failure to honor previous agreements he had with them. Only yesterday, the terrorists killed 9 persons and injured many others. He noted that some of the bandits were from Zamfara and Kaduna states, as well as Niger Republic. Oh dear, you recall that Governor Masari was heavily criticized when he took that trip into the forest to dialogue with the bandits. And the bandits, one of them had an AK-47 who was armed, standing right next to the governor. He was flayed for that, frankly. But I think what he was trying to achieve then is taking the path of peace, which he has found has not worked. And I guess now it's back to relying on security operatives, not on the honor of bandits, because you know what they say about honor among thieves.
There's no honor among thieves.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, you are right. At that time, people were concerned that it wasn't only Masari. There were 2 other governors.
Yes, in the Northwest.
Yes, in the Northwest, who met with the bandits. And also at a time, they had a meeting with some governors from Niger Republic as a way of trying to find cross-border international collaboration on the issue of the bandits in that part of the country. But we have seen consistently that in terms of strategy, negotiating with the bandits may not always be the best option. And people complained at the time that, look, these bandits, they should be apprehended. They should be taken through the administrative or justice system, and that justice must be done particularly for those people who have been killed, whose houses has been destroyed. But to be having a handshake with the bandits would seem to be an inversion of the cause of justice. So now the realization, I think, it should be a welcome realization.
Yes.
That truly it's better to adopt, due process in dealing with criminals. We use the word bandits, but we're talking about criminals, about terrorists. So an open handshake with them may not be the best option to take in the circumstances.
Clearly not. Well, that's all on the news headlines. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll have the trio of Rotus, Odirri, Michael Wilson, and Aaron Akerejola to give us updates on Africa and global business and COVID-19. Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News.
Rotus Odirri is now here to give us Africa Business Update. Over to you, Rotus. Good morning.
Dr. Good morning, Tundun. Yeah, so today what we're looking at is OPEC production cut compliance for Nigeria, also what the rising oil prices mean for foreign exchange and our reserves, and then, unfortunately, some sexual harassment claims in the Nollywood entertainment sector and tech sector of Nigeria. But starting here, with OPEC is hopefully meeting this week to talk about extending production cuts in June. Reuters ran a survey claiming that Nigeria's compliance was only 19%. Now, the Minister of State for Petroleum, Timmy Silva, responded on Instagram stating that according to NNPC data, May production for Nigeria was at 1.6 million barrels per day versus the reference production figure of 1.8 million barrels per day. It came out to about a difference of 216 barrels difference. Now that translated to an actual 52% compliance, which is not what Reuters had at 19%. He also stated that they included a couple condensates which were not supposed to be counted towards Nigeria's, I think it's Agbami and Agbo or something like that. Two condensates shouldn't be included. There's a Energy Bureau chief by the name of Amir Bakr. She's the Bureau Chief for Energy Intel, which said that according to their estimates, Nigeria's, or rather OPEC Plus full compliance was at 86%. So there's various numbers with Nigeria's compliance, but Timmy Silva, the Minister of State, is saying that for June, we'll actually improve with regards to the compliance. And that basically is talking about reducing our oil production in order to be in line with what OPEC is looking for the month of June. So there she is saying that, that their estimates have OPEC Plus achieving 86% compliance in May, which is encouraging. Although Gabon, South Sudan and Angola, they have pretty abysmal numbers, anywhere from 40% to 20% and so on. So they still have to pull up as far as the African countries are concerned. Next up is, I talked yesterday about how the Senate had increased the benchmark oil price for the budget to $28 a barrel from $25 based on oil prices appreciating. That has now translated in a Bloomberg article to possibly easing devaluation concerns for the country. If we look at a couple charts that we have, there's one where we can see the increase in the oil price translating to an ease in non-deliverable forward. So we've got three lines. The blue line, you can see the blue line, which is a 12-month NDF is non-deliverable forwards. It's offshore trading of the Naira. And it's like a gauge as to where the Naira is trading at. It peaked at 520. It's come down to about 455. The 3-month NDF, that peaked at about 440. It's come down to about 415. And then we've got the interbank rates at the bottom there, which is at about 381. So generally, rates, the Naira has strengthened as oil prices have increased, which is encouraging. Also, if we look at the central bank's foreign reserves, that has also, from about early April, it dropped to about 33 billion. It's risen to about 36, yeah. And you can see the correlation. The black line is Nigeria's gross foreign reserves. You can see the correlation with Brent crude prices. At the very tip, where that green bar is, you can see both of them appreciating in the last few days. So this has been also very encouraging with reserves increasing and also with the Naira strengthening. However, you live by oil, you die by oil. There's still, as Dr. and Tundun, you all have talked about several times, we need to diversify our revenue base. So this is good news for the country, though. So we hope that oil prices continue to appreciate in the near and long term. And then finally, this is on pretty disturbing news. I didn't want to include any tweets or anything like that, but with what's the movement that's been happening with the rape issues in Nigeria, it's caused a number of women in a couple sectors, in entertainment sector of Nigeria and the tech sector, to come out and speak out about sexual harassment. For Nollywood, a young actress said there was a producer or a director who was offering an opportunity to, participate in movies, but she had to offer her body in response. And there's DMs and actual evidence, receipts are actually there, and it's caused a big stir. In the tech space, a young lady came out yesterday on Twitter saying that a mentor at an accelerator program exposed himself to her, and she actually put out his name. He's the owner of a software company. Again, I didn't want to put the actual tweets there, but it's all the rage right now in the technology sector and entertainment sector. And the narrative now is that there is too much silence with regards to the sexual harassment that is going on in various business segments of Nigeria. So a lot of people, I've reached out to all of them asking if they would come on air to be interviewed about this. Haven't gotten a response yet, but so far this is what's taking place in our business segment.
Well, I really commend the women who spoke out.
Yes,
and
yes.
if there are any male victims, they also need to speak
out as well,
so
for sure.
important.
For sure.
Well, on the issue of sexual harassment, in the last few days, with what has been done to Hua and Elizabeth and Jennifer in Kaduna State, and also only yesterday we had a report of a lady, a 19-year-old lady called Barakat Bello in Ibadan, who was not only raped, but killed, murdered, and the father came home to find, our corpse. So there's been a growing sense of outrage and an emerging Me Too movement in Nigeria, not just in Nollywood and tech, but also even in the music industry. I've seen quite a number of ladies giving very disturbing details about their experience. And I just hope that outrage will continue, because human rights is involved, the dignity of the human person is involved, and in almost every case there's violence involved, and all those are unlawful ways to relate with other human beings. As for OPEC and Nigeria, well, I mean, Bloomberg, different from what the energy analyst gave, Bakri, says the compliance is about 77%. But of course, the figures will differ. Yeah, but Nigeria and Iraq were identified as the usual laggards. And then that's interesting, because in May, the Minister of State for Petroleum, Timi Presiva, had pointed out that Nigeria was going to comply, and that in fact Nigeria started its own cuts in April, but only to now find out that Nigeria is considered one of the, in fact, Bloomberg describes us as one of the usual laggards. But the challenge that developing countries face, of course, is that in the face of, the COVID-19 and the supply and demand crisis in the oil sector, they lost a lot of money. They can't cover up government spending. Look at Nigeria. I mean, from oil alone, we have lost over 160 billion naira, but with, as you pointed out, with the oil price appreciating, then of course there's been some reduction, in the kind of calamity that we can face. But as Tundun pointed out earlier on, even the Minister of Information has had to say, look, we have a serious revenue crisis. But I hope the government of Nigeria will learn the appropriate lesson. I would have loved to ask you whether there are sanctions for non-compliance beyond criticism, but we don't have more time.
We'll talk more in the next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rotus. Moving on to more business updates. Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning. Stock markets still continue on a march, really, despite what I would think is a fairly growing menu of risk. They're buoyed by the prospect of further monetary and fiscal stimulus. I'll come on to that in a moment. And also that this gradual unlocking of the world's economies, which they're optimistic about as well. According to the Financial Times, though, and you may like to talk locally to some of your people about this, but some hedge funds are actually getting ready for a second market plunge. They're taking put options, i.e. options that allow you to profit when a price goes down, on stock indices and currencies that are particularly risk-averse, like the Australian dollar and the Korean won. But there is going to be a bit of a pause today. So Asian stocks hit 2-month highs. The exception, strangely enough, was China, which is due to the lingering concerns about the heating up of diplomatic tensions in the United States. I was talking to somebody in Singapore earlier today, their afternoon. Key to real change about everything is the increase in flights. And we're really looking at 2021 before that happens. So it's going to be a very, very gradual progress towards that happening. As far as Hong Kong's concerned, now here's an interesting one for you. 2 UK banks, HSBC and Standard Chartered, in very, very carefully worded statements, have backed the national security law that China's imposing, very much against the UK government response on this. And following on from 2 other British ex-colonial trading houses, Swire and Jardine Matheson, all of which have been under apparently considerable pressure. Here's what HSBC said. Forgive me reading it. It says that the bank had enjoyed unique privileges in Hong Kong, which should not be taken for granted. And China, about HSBC, said, as it prints banknotes in Hong Kong, then they should express themselves. This idea of one country and 2 systems is proving very, very complicated. Of course, it has all the way through history, particularly on the same day that the UK itself offered 3 million Hong Kong people extended visa rights. There'll be more to that as time moves on, no doubt. Australia, the longest boom in their history, 29 years, is at an end, into recession for the first time. But they don't call Australia the lucky country for nothing. And again, analysts I've been speaking to there have been saying that the demand, which will be growing for their iron ore and their gas, again, particularly from China. The market view is that Australia will take this very much in its stride. So overall then, global markets, the German DAX managed to reverse 75% of its losses since March. And of course, the NASDAQ last night posted a new all-time high. The gap between Wall Street and Main Street is becoming absolutely immense now. So what we're going to get today and tomorrow. Yesterday we got the job claims, the ADP job claims. US is facing its highest unemployment rate in decades, and US stocks are retesting that. We've seen gradual improvements though in the services data from the United States. Not as bad as absolutely expected, but it's still pretty bad. Expectations for yesterday's figures in the United States were that 9 million jobs would actually be lost in May. The figure was actually 2.76, which was still just as bad, but much better than people had actually expected. And the April figure was also revised up. So really all eyes on what's happening in the United States tomorrow with the big jobless figures, which always come out once a month, and that really will move the markets. Back to you for the moment.
Well, Michael Wilson, we'll take a short break now. When we return, Global Business Update will continue. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Michael Wilson is still with us from London on Global Business Update. Mr. Wilson, you were talking about that gap between Wall Street and Main Street. Is it a class issue with the have-nots being the one to bear the brunt of the COVID pandemic in usual fashion, while the haves, just keep soaring right ahead as usual?
Well, there is that. I think social issues are of particular concern in the United States. I mean, I can't speak for Africa, but certainly as the United States are concerned, those gaps are certainly being exposed. But the most important thing, I think, is that the markets themselves are not really dependent on a social picture, and that's the sadness of it, really. What we're seeing is the markets moving away from all the economic scarring that's actually taken place. As we said a couple of weeks ago, that all the employment gains of the last decade in the United States have been erased by COVID-19. So that is going to take some particular time to get back to normal. I saw an estimate yesterday, and again, I didn't really say it to you because it was only an estimate, and nobody's got any idea, they can't have, of what's actually going on. But somebody was saying that, 10 years it would take for this pandemic for the economic damage that this pandemic has actually caused to be put right. That may well be true. If you look at Morgan Stanley, for example, their chief financial officer, coincidentally, another Mike Wilson, no relation to me, was saying that the markets have actually been defensive for quite some time, and that the economies and the markets would climb pretty quickly out of where we are right now. Unfortunately, it's still a guess. What is holding it up is this extraordinary amount of money that's being thrown at the problem. The EU, European Central Bank, meets today. Will expect, I think it will. I didn't think this yesterday. I've changed my mind overnight because of what the markets have been saying, that it will add to its 750 billion euro emergency aid programme. The general consensus is that rates will be kept on hold, but the ECB will increase its programme. It may not do it today. It may say that it may do it next month, and it may be that this programme is extended beyond October. But it's probably not surprising, therefore, that the equity markets have really got ahead of themselves. The big risk is that there are countries like Germany and France who will not take kindly to this. They have their own views, as do some other of the northern European states, about how much money should be pumped in to prop up the whole of the project. You can understand that too, and the governing council in Germany have already said that they feel as though the ECB has gone too far. So we'll just have to wait to see what they actually say later on today. I throw something to you finally from the oil market. Now, you were talking about Africa, you were talking about Russia, talking about OPEC, here's one that you should take into consideration. It is, of course, the hurricane season today in the Gulf of Mexico, the US Gulf of Mexico, and therefore you have the usual close down of rigs. This time around, of course, this is a big test for COVID-19 and all the shutting of production and the restarting complications that will actually prove. That'll be very costly because of restarting, because of the virus precautions. Smaller producers may suffer. You may wish to compute that in with where you feel the oil price is going at the moment. The thing about the oil market.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very
Wilson.
much.
Now for an update on COVID-19 is Aaron Akirajala.
Yeah, good morning, good morning, Tundun. I'm almost getting used to saying Leila.
I caught that.
Many. My sincerest apologies.
You can't turn your back for 5 seconds.
My biggest apologies. How you doing today?
I'm great, thank
A lovely smile. Okay, Doctor?
Good morning, Aaron.
Yes, good morning to you. And let's get straight into it today. We've been speaking about how things are unraveling in the Latin American country of Brazil, and it's only getting worse because when you look at the figures actually right now, another day, another problem. As a matter of fact, right now they've actually recorded a new high in terms of daily deaths, 1,349. It's the it's the number of deaths recorded on Wednesday. And shocking as it may, the president is still insistent and they are still aggressively trying to open the economy in Brazil. And the president was being asked about all that is unfolding in Brazil. And in his own words, he says death was everyone's destiny. So,
What?
and I'm like, when you think the president has pushed it too far, Mr. Bolsonaro just finds a way, just like President Donald Trump, to always say things that will rub people the wrong way. And right now, he's saying that is everyone's destiny. So, give or take, that's how it is. As it stands right now, registered deaths, 32,548, and confirmed cases in Brazil is 584,016. So you look at all that, it's rising astronomically, and Mr. Bolsonaro is not perturbed one way or the other.
Well, the biggest problem in Brazil, as I keep saying, is Jair Bolsonaro himself. Yeah. And it's good you quoted him, because when people started criticizing that, look, this is not the time when the government should even lift the minimal lockdown that it had attempted. He then said, well, people will die anyway, that death is, is part of human destiny, which means that he doesn't care enough. The situation that you have in Brazil, you have a similar situation in Mexico, with the figures, the fatality rates going up. You have the same situation also in South Korea, which everybody had been commending previously for the strategy that it adopted. But what is even more instructive is the fact that in Sweden, which is one example that a lot of people like to cite, because Sweden did not lock down at all.
Yes, they didn't.
Yeah, but the chief epidemiologist in Sweden now is more or less apologizing for the advice that he gave in that regard, because across that region, you find that Sweden has the highest fatality rate, and one of the highest in the world, at 43 deaths per 100,000, much higher than what you even find in Denmark or Norway, the neighboring countries that decided to shut down. And Anders Tegel, who is the chief epidemiologist, has been quoted, by the papers as saying that he thought that they made a mistake, and that if they were to reconsider the situation, they would make a choice between locking down or, imposing slight restrictions. In other words, it's an admission of the fact that not even locking down at all was bad. And then you find all these countries that are having high fatality rates now say they will ease lockdown. In Brazil, the government, the president, not the government, does not even care. So this is the situation. It's all about leadership, and it's all about, listening to science rather than politics.
Except when the scientists are wrong, like in this case of Sweden.
Yes.
So much for their herd immunity theory. An absolute disaster.
All right, moving away from that, some news is actually coming in, and they talk about hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for COVID-19 has always been on the front burner, and the WHO has actually said that they will continue trial tests of hydroxychloroquine to see whether or not it can actually help people. But a doctor in the University of Minnesota is actually speaking, Dr. David Bower, who has actually said that, as a matter of fact, hydroxychloroquine is no different, in his own words, from placebo drugs. That there is no way anyone who takes hydroxychloroquine can prevent contracting coronavirus. And that's where he actually stands concerning it. So, saying that you would probably, just like what the President of the United States, President Donald Trump, was doing, whereby he was taking the hydroxychloroquine as a preventive measure from coronavirus, the doctor from Minnesota is saying, no, it doesn't prevent anything. As a matter of fact, if you can still take it and still contract coronavirus.
I'm glad to hear that from the doctor, because it's not exactly like popping vitamin C. I mean, people should absolutely not take it unless they're prescribed for a specific ailment. I mean, it's a disaster to just go get yourself some and start swallowing pills. It doesn't make sense.
Because people they've criticized Donald Trump for actually pushing that particular line of thoughts.
What is even more worrisome is the contraindications that have been cited by doctors. That, look, if you use hydroxychloroquine, there are risk factors.
Yes, there are.
It could affect the heart rhythm, and it could have other side effects. And the study on which WHO based its decision to suspend the inclusion of hydroxychloroquine in the solidarity trials that is conducting in 35 countries around the world. That research has also been criticized by many scientists. In fact, Lancet, the journal in which it appeared, has had to issue an expression of concern to say that that research is potentially problematic, although they did not go far as saying that they're withdrawing the publication, but they've commissioned other studies to reach a firm conclusion. But when WHO based its decision on that, I think it was a cautious decision. And what they said was that, look, they will suspend for either a week or 2 weeks. Now they've re-included hydroxychloroquine in the solidarity trials. But at the time, when they took that decision, Nigeria said it will continue with the trial of hydroxychloroquine. India, Brazil.
Yes.
And then, of course, you had President Trump, championing hydroxychloroquine. But I think, it was good that WHO was cautious and is just following basic science protocols.
Yeah, before we actually go, let's actually turn our attention to Africa and looking at how things are actually playing out. As of today, there are 162,673 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the entirety of Africa, with 70,475 recoveries and 4,601 deaths so far. And these numbers have always astounded experts who are still hoping for the worst. And now I'm saying that
fingers crossed.
It cannot. We hope it doesn't.
He's an Africanist.
Okay. But without a doubt,
he's an Afro-optimist.
Without a doubt, North Africa, you can actually see from the right hand of the screen there, North Africa, the spike is still very, very high in North Africa, and is also rising heavily in Western Africa, talking about places like Ghana, places like Nigeria, who have actually overtaken some other countries in terms of number of cases in Africa. Initially, we were sometime at the height of this, we were 6th. We've actually moved now to 3rd in Africa behind.
No, WHO says we are 2nd.
Okay, we're not even 2nd.
When you say 3rd, you are quoting Ihekwazu.
Yeah.
But WHO says Nigeria has the 2nd highest number of cases.
So you look at it and you say to yourself that we need to be more cautious, and we're still talking about lockdowns, the easing of lockdown, and how to go about all this. And there's still back and forth, especially in Nigeria, in terms of religious activities. How do you go about them? Should they be opened? And what are the modalities? We need to really tread with caution so that we do not have a second wave, so to speak.
Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.